So my name is Sandy Lamb, and I am the owner of Altitude Business Coaching. And I work with women and executive women in male-dominated industries. Why male-dominated industries? I worked for 27 years in engineering and construction, and oftentimes I was the only woman at the table. And that was fine. That was fine with me. It became a position that I was very comfortable with. And certainly I did not look at it in terms of a hindrance. I looked at it in terms of ways in which I could demonstrate my unique leadership style. But that wasn't always the case. So I believe in a world where leaders model emotionally intelligent behavior to transform the way their teams collaborate and grow, both personally and professionally. I had a turning point in my career about 10 years ago when I was working in nuclear power. And again, I was new to nuclear power. I was new to project management, and I was scared to death. I suffered a little bit at the time from imposter syndrome. How did I get here? Do I really deserve to have this role and be in project management? And I thought, how am I going to lead through this time? And the way in which I did it is something that I am not proud of. And that was to lead like everyone else around me. At the time, it was all men. And it was a very bureaucratic leadership style. And there was a lot of pounding of fists and yelling. And it really was not authentic to me. So as you might imagine, I was not successful. And it didn't go well. But it was a very, like I said, a turning point in my career. Those of you that know me, and if you're familiar with DISC, I am a very high I. That means that I love people. And that also means that I'm an influencer and a promoter. I have spoken all over the country on emotional intelligence, and I have never done it in front of a computer screen. So over the course of our time together, if you are on live, please engage. I really want to connect with you. That's what gets to me, right? That's what gets me moving, is connecting. And it's really hard when there's not an audience live out there. So I'm going to do my best to ask you some questions, and I really do encourage you to engage. Okay, so EQ or IQ, here's your first opportunity. If I were to ask you, what do you want? What's the most important thing you look for in a leader? Would you say EQ, meaning their emotional intelligence, or would you say IQ, meaning their general intelligence, their intelligence quotient? I say EQ. And the reason that I say EQ is because do I want a smart boss? Of course I want a smart boss. But do I want somebody, is it more important for me to have a smart boss and to be very knowledgeable, or is it important for them to engage with me and really care about me? The other really distinguishing important factor between IQ and EQ, IQ is something you're born with. EQ is something you develop and nurture and grow over time. So I want to really focus in on EQ because that's something I can work on. It's something that all of us can work on to get better at every day. Somebody asked me a question this week, and I thought it was a great question, so I'm going to share it again here. And that was, what do you think you know for sure? I will tell you two truths that I know for sure based on my own personal experience. Number one, people do not leave jobs, they leave supervisors. And number two, it is not only okay to show emotion at work, in your business, but I actually encourage you to do so. And why do I say that? Very simply, showing emotion at work, in my opinion, is your way of exposing your vulnerability and showing your passion. There were times when I used to cry at work, and I worked with a lot of men. So doing so, I felt always like this is a sign of weakness. And I work with a lot of women today who say the same thing. It is not a sign of weakness. I cried at work because I was very passionate about my work and about my people and about what I did. And there's nothing wrong with that. If I'm looking for a thought leader, those are two traits that I want in a thought leader, right? Is vulnerability and passion. Do you think that you can control your emotions? True? Yes? Okay. It is actually a trick question. And I say that because you cannot control your emotions any more than you can control breathing. It's going to happen. If you're alive, you're going to feel and you're going to breathe, right? What you can do, however, is manage those emotions and learn to regulate them, to your favor in order to become a better leader. If you are familiar with emotional intelligence and emotional quotients, Daniel Goleman is a psychologist, and he is considered the modern day thought leader on emotional intelligence. What I would tell you is that Sandy Lamb is the modern day thought leader on emotional intelligence. And I'll explain what I mean by that towards the end. But really, Daniel Goleman had a quote that I absolutely love, and it is 90% of the difference between star performers and average performers in senior leadership positions. So, okay, think about senior leadership position. You're an entrepreneur, you run a company, right? You run your own business. You are that senior leader I'm talking about. So 90% of the difference between star performers and average performers is EQ. 90%. That is huge. So if you want to go from being average to being a rock star, you need to focus in on emotional intelligence, and you need to figure out a way to raise your emotional intelligence. So let's dive in. Let's talk about the specific areas in the emotional quotient assessment that I deliver, and what each of those, how you can work to grow each of those particular areas. So the emotional quotient assessments are divided into two different parts. I would call them the intrapersonal intelligence and then your interpersonal intelligence. The intra, again, is going to be, obviously, as it sounds, from within. So what are the areas in which I can work on my own emotions from the inside first? This is where it starts. I purposely start with interpersonal intelligence because each of these build on one another. Let's face it, people, if you cannot manage your own emotions, right? If you're not understanding your emotions as they're occurring a day to day, how can you possibly care about other people? How can you possibly worry about what other people are feeling if you yourself are not totally grounded, right? So I start with interpersonal. The first area of interpersonal intelligence is self-awareness. And that is exactly as it sounds. That is, I am aware of my emotions and my moods, and more importantly, the impact that those emotions have on other people in real time. There's the key, in real time, right? Everybody understands that the emotions happen, right? But if you are not aware of them happening in real time, how on earth can you regulate them? You can't, right? So the first step in emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And I will tell you that my clients, for the most part, are average or above average when it comes to self-awareness. They're pretty aware of their emotions. They're in tune to their emotions, right? The next step in interpersonal intelligence is self-regulation. Here, my friends, is where the wheels fall off. And I say that in all fairness, everybody struggles with self-regulation. Almost all of my clients, almost every assessment I have ever given, for the most part, the area of self-regulation appears to be the lowest area for everyone. What is self-regulation? It is, again, going back to the idea that you can't control those emotions, but you can manage them and regulate them. It is, how do I effectively regulate my emotions? Once I'm aware that they're happening, I'm feeling them coming up, right? What do? Do I stop? Do I pause? Or do I push through and act before I'm really thinking, right? Do I know how to suspend judgment in that particular situation? Let's face it, all of us have, as my daughters, my teenage daughters would tell you, we're all judgy, right? We're judgy from time to time. Everybody has that judgment gene in them, right? But the idea is not to let that, is to find a way to manage and regulate that. So don't let that control you. You figure out a way to, maybe you go below the line once in a while, but you don't stay there, right? You need to move and raise yourself above the line. The third and final area of interpersonal intelligence is motivation. So what motivates you? Drop a comment for me. Tell me what motivates you. Is it money? Is it status? Is it recognition? Is it inspiration? Is it that I want to inspire others? Is it that I want to gain knowledge? What motivates you as an entrepreneur? And then know that the motivation piece of the EQ assessment doesn't have anything to do with money or status. It is the passion, right, that you have that goes beyond money and status to get up and go to work every day, to run your business, right, to manage your employees. That motivation in particular in that EQ assessment goes beyond money and status. So there are things, some of us are motivated by money, and that's okay. Michael said that yesterday on his talk. That's okay, but there has to be that what takes you above and beyond. For me, it's altruism. For me, it's helping others. That is my number one motivating factor. Okay, so once you have got your hands around the interpersonal aspects of emotional intelligence, then we can move into the interpersonal. I will tell you, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, everyone out there listening, pay close attention to this, because in my opinion, interpersonal intelligence is critical when you're talking about managing relationships and taking your entrepreneurial status to becoming the thought leader, right, that you want to be. The first area of interpersonal intelligence is social skills. We might as well, in my opinion, rename this one human connection. Okay, Alex, you're out there listening. Human connection, girl. It is the ability to manage relationships with others and network. So human connection is so, so important right now in our world. And I absolutely agree, because it is your ability to not the sympathetic, right? The empathetic we're talking about here, which is, how do I walk a mile in that person's shoes? How do I feel what they are feeling? And the only way in which you can do that is through self-regulation, is through suspending judgment, right? Is through actively listening. So I'm listening. I am listening with the intent to understand you, to hear you, let you know that you are heard and that you matter, right? And then seeking to understand, and then finding a way in which to help them through that, right? But it's all about the listening here. It's not about the judging. It's not about the assuming you know what it is that they're going through. It's about empathy requires active listening. Things that I've been thinking about recently. So as an entrepreneur, maybe you're launching a startup, right? Maybe you're launching a new business, and you're trying to figure out setting yourself some goals, setting yourself some internal goals. So you get to October 1st. This is the date that you set for your launch and your startup, and you miss that date. That day comes and goes, and you don't launch as you had originally anticipated. So how are you feeling? Are you disappointed? Are you frustrated? This is a time when you really need to have that high EQ, right? When you really need to be able to understand that this is not failure. This is growth, right? This is a way for me to understand why this didn't happen, and then more importantly, move forward, right? And continue to move forward. Okay, maybe you're out there, maybe you're thinking, Sandy, you know when I need high EQ? I need it every day in this quarantine. I've needed it every day for the last month. And I will say, there are people out there, like, it happens, right? But I'm going to go back to the point that I made at the very beginning, and that is, know that where you are today, right, is where you're supposed to be. And you need to bloom where you're planted. So I am a glass half full kind of person, and I always look at the bright side and the silver lining, and I have found so much silver lining throughout this, because I continue to focus on how can I help other people through this, right? And it's not all about me in this particular case. It's about the time that I'm spending with my families, and the time that we have with our families right now, and the things that we can do, and keeping that right frame of mind. Bloom where you are planted, right? I can't emphasize that enough. Okay, so if EQ is so important, Sandy, how the heck do I work to grow on it, to grow my EQ every day? Because you said that's possible, and in fact it is. It helps you, if it helps you, think about this in terms of better decision making. So what makes an effective leader to me is somebody that has the ability to care about other people, right? Thank you, Theodore Roosevelt, for my favorite quote: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So that day, that pivot point in my career 10 years ago, I vowed to now make sure that I led authentically. I vowed to lead knowing that other people mattered, right? That I saw them and that I heard them and that they mattered to me as a person and not just as an employee. So ultimately you can become a better leader, and that will make you a better decision maker, right? When you are working in collaboration with your teams. This is where I talked about emotional intelligence and the importance of that collaboration. So here is a case, right, where this is not an either or, this is a but, both and, sorry. And some of us have talked about this a little bit. Okay, I've had leaders say to me, you know what, Sandy, I really don't have time to worry about the people. I don't have time to think about them right now. You know, I really have to focus on the bottom line. I have got news for you people, right? If you are sitting out there focusing on the bottom line, then you are missing the game. This is not either I work on people or I work on the bottom line. This is a both and situation. And what I mean by that is, when you focus on people, when they know they are heard, right? When you lead with a high level of emotional intelligence, the bottom line takes care of itself. But if you are not focusing on people, then you are missing the mark. You are missing the opportunity to really demonstrate yourself as a thought leader. Okay, so here are some suggestions in terms of ways in which you can work on your EQ. And that is, don't react, respond. Okay, so say I have an employee who has lost one of my key accounts, right? He made a small mistake, he or she made a small mistake, and I lost a key account. In react mode, what am I going to do? How am I feeling? I'm angry, maybe I'm upset, I'm disappointed. I might have a tendency to place blame, right? I might have a tendency to yell or call this person out in front of other people. Do not do that, people. I just told you about the bureaucratic leadership style and how that does not work. Yelling at people and making them feel like they're, you know, not worthwhile in front of others is not a good way to lead, right? So don't react in that particular situation, respond. This is a great way of specifically working on the self-regulation that we talked about. So what does respond look like in this particular case? Respond looks like I bring the group together, I bring the team together. There's no yelling, there's no screaming, there's no finger pointing, there's no placing blame. There is asking questions. There is, how do we collaborate? How do we work together to get this client back? That's powerful. That's what EQ looks like. Active listening, I already talked about the importance of listening to other people, being empathetic. That's the third area, learning to empathize. These all work together, right? So if I'm working on one, I am in turn working on the other as well. The other thing I say in terms of raising your EQ is breathe. Just breathe, right? This is a way in which I have a client who says, oh my God, I sit in this meeting and I get so upset or whatever. Get up, walk out, right? I'm on a phone call. Take a break, take a breather. These are ways in which you can very simply self-regulate. Because if you remove yourself from the situation, then you can't possibly react, right? But if you allow yourself the time, if you breathe through it, if you meditate, I meditate all the time now. And it's something I wish to God that I knew when I was in corporate and in the corporate world. Okay, so let me share with you my definition of an expert. Here's my definition of an expert. That is anyone who knows one more thing than anyone else in the room. Guess what? There's no one else in the room with me. Therefore, I'm an expert. No, but in all seriousness, I do consider myself a modern day thought leader when it comes to EQ. And why do I say that? Because I go around the world speaking to people and sharing this message with you about the key areas of emotional intelligence and why it's important in terms of becoming the leader that you can be. And I share this theory in hopes that it becomes your reality. As a thought leader in this area, I want to pave the way for you to be able to take what you have learned here today and this week from all of us and take action. How are we going to take action? What are we going to do differently as a result of what we heard? Because if we don't, you'll never become a thought leader. You will never take that step from entrepreneur to thought leader if you cannot take what you learn and apply it, right? And figure out how best to apply that. So let me tell you, well, first let me talk about the call to action. So number one, if you have not taken an EQ assessment, please take one. Find a way to take one. And, in this particular case, knowledge is power. You cannot work to improve your emotional intelligence level if you don't know where you sit today. So knowledge is power. Find out what your EQ level is. Find out the area, those 5 areas, right? Find out what area you really need to work on, right? And then work with a mentor or a coach or a trusted advisor, somebody you trust that is going to walk you through this report. When you get your assessment, it could be 30, 40, 50 pages. And I sit down with my clients and walk them through this because it's very overwhelming, right? But it's so powerful. I'm telling you, there's so many juicy little nugs in there, as Alex would say, to be learned. And if you don't take the time to learn them, then you cannot put together what I think is important, and that is an EQ action plan. So what area of EQ am I going to work on specifically? I highly recommend one area. Start with one. Don't try and take 2 or 3 on at a time, right? Work on more, one particular area and figure out what your action plan looks like and how you can get better at that particular thing. And then number 3, and the most important, work to grow your EQ every damn day.